Morning. I hope everybody's having a wonderful week. And today we have a double portion that we're going to be looking at in this week's Torah portion. Actually, this upcoming Shabbos is a special Shabbos. Last week we blessed the new month. We blessed the month of Iyar. And this Friday and this Shabbos is Rosh Chodesh Iyar. And we find ourselves now in the period of time known as the Sephira or the Omer, which is actually a combination of both. It's the Sephira HaOmer. It's the counting of the Omer. And we have the mitzvah to count 7 complete weeks from Pesach till Shavuos, from the time we left Egypt until we came to Mount Sinai, until we came to receive the Torah. So, what is the purpose of that counting? Hashem asked us to count 7 complete weeks. And the purpose of the counting was twofold. One was to create an anticipation and an excitement for the receiving of the Torah. And the other was to actually prepare for that receiving of the Torah. Since we had left Mitzrayim, we had left Egypt, God took us out of Egypt, but really what we needed to do was take Egypt out of ourselves. And so those 7 weeks were given to us to work on our 7 character traits, our 7 emotions. And each week we perfect one of those character traits. This period of time is also a period of mourning. And we mourn the loss of the students of Rabbi Akiva, who lived during the time of the Roman rule. And he had many pious, righteous students, but they were lacking in the area of respect of one another, of making room for another person to have an opinion. And because of that, a plague was brought upon them, and they many of the students passed away. So this period of time between Pesach and Shavuos is a period of mourning. We don't make weddings during this time. We're not supposed to listen to live music during this time. Many have the custom not to wear new clothes during this time. And it's a time to work on this area specifically. We said it's a time of working on our midos, on our character traits, but specifically we should be working on respect of one another and caring for one another, as this is the antidote to the plague that took place that killed so many of Rabbi Akiva's students. And during this time, we count every single day the 7 weeks from Pesach to Shavuos. So we find ourselves in extraordinary times. Actually, the month that we're coming into is the month of Iyar. Iyar is the month that is connected to healing. It says that every single day of Iyar, we have this mitzvah of the counting of the Omer. We don't have any big holidays during this month, but what we do have is every day we have a mitzvah that we fulfill, a special mitzvah, which is the counting of the Omer. And during this time, we are working on perfecting ourselves. We do have a mini holiday of Lag BaOmer. We'll talk about that another time, the 33rd day of the Omer. But the month of Iyar itself, our sages say that we can see in the name of the month a special quality of this month, and it's the quality of healing. In Hebrew, the month Iyar has 4 letters, Aleph, Yud, Yud, Reish, and that's an acronym for Ani Hashem Rofecha. I am God, your healer. So it's a special month connected to healing, and Hashem knows we need much of these healings, and may the merit of our learning today bring healing to the entire world, bring healing specifically to all those who are sick, especially from this virus that we're experiencing now, and the month should bring great healing to the entire world. And actually, this parsha itself gives us a great tool to bring about that healing. We have this week a double portion. Oftentimes, as we learn the parshios, we learn the portions, there are double portions. Some weeks we read 2 portions so that we'll be able to finish the entire Torah by the end of the cycle of the year, by Simchas Torah. So this week we have 2 portions. One is called Tazriah and the other one is called Metzorah. And in these parshas, they continue actually in the same theme as the previous parshas, which is the theme of Tumah and Tahara, purity and impurity, which purity and impurity are really the vessels, and they represent life and the ability to receive God's blessings, and the opposite. Tahara is purity. It's when a person is in a state of ritual purity and can receive blessing at that time. And Tumah is impurity. And we've learned in the previous parashas there are different ways that a person can become impure. We know that coming in contact with a dead body brings about the concept of impurity. This week's portion, Tazriah, begins with the laws of a woman who gives birth, and that giving birth brings about the need of a ritual purification. That when she gives birth, she becomes ritually impure, and ultimately she will need to go through a purification process. And this is actually a very important, integral part of Jewish life. And this part of Jewish life is known as Taharat HaMishpacha, family purity. And this involves the laws of the use of the mikveh, that when a woman becomes ritually impure, she goes through a purification process, and that culminates in the use of a mikveh. And we know that it's such an important part of Jewish life that the Torah tells us that if a community can only afford a certain amount to create the infrastructure of the community, and they don't have enough money to build a shul and a mikveh, so the mikveh comes first, because this is such an important part of Jewish life. And even though we're not going to get into this part of Jewish life right now, it's certainly something that should be explored and learned about and supported in every way, because this really is the foundation of Jewish life. And then the Parashah of Tazriah goes on to tell us that when a woman gives birth to a male, that on the 8th day, that male has to have a bris, has to have a circumcision. Now it's very interesting. We can ask ourselves the question, Hashem created the entire world. He created everything in the world, and you begin to explore the world, you see its magnificence, it's unbelievable. And yet, here we have a child that is born, and so to speak, the child is not perfected in the eyes of Hashem. And as a Jewish child, Hashem says this child has to have a bris, has to have a circumcision. Why could God not have created this child already circumcised? Actually, we know in our history that there have been certain people that have been born already circumcised. But why did Hashem give us this mitzvah to circumcise a child? And the explanation given, one of the explanations given for this is that this actually shows us the purpose of our life. God created this world, and God could have created this world in a way that it didn't need any work doing to it. But in his kindness, what did Hashem do? He created this world, and then Hashem says, I am going to bring you in as my partners to complete the creation of the world. And this is what the bris represents, that Hashem has left work for us to do in this world. And why did he do that? He did that because God is chesed, God is kindness. He is essentially kind, and a human being lives their best life, enjoys life to its fullest when a human being feels needed, when a human being has purpose in their existence. And therefore Hashem says, I've created this amazing world. It's a beautiful world. But not only have I created this beautiful world, but I have created it in a way that you can enjoy it in a most unbelievable way, because I'm going to make you my partners. You are going to bring about the perfection of, of this world. And this is what we do in life. Our purpose here is to perfect this world, to make this world a place that Hashem, that God dwells in, to make it a home for God. What is a home? A home is a place where you feel comfortable. You create the kind of environment that you are comfortable in. And Hashem says, I want to be comfortable in this world. And how am I going to feel comfortable in this world is when you reveal my essence in this world. The world, the way God has designed the world olam is the word in Hebrew for a world, which also means, it comes from the root herlem. It has the quality of hiding. What does it hide? It hides its true essence, which is God. Really, there's nothing in this world other than God. Everything is God. But the way Hashem created the world is that the nature hides the true essence, which is God. And our job is to reveal that godliness. So we do that. We're supposed to do that on a global level, and we also do it on a very personal level. Every Jew contains a neshama, a soul. What's a neshama? A neshama is a piece of Hashem. It's a piece of God. And that neshama, that soul, really wants to express itself by living its purpose, which is to fulfill Torah and mitzvahs. But Hashem also gave us a yetzer hara, an evil inclination, an animalistic soul, a selfish, self-sense-driven soul. Why did Hashem do that? Hashem did that so that we would have free choice, so that anything that we accomplish in life, we actually can earn that. So because of that, there are times in our life that we behave in a way that rather than becoming close to Hashem by revealing our essence, which is that peace of God, by acting in a godly way, we do the opposite. And one of the things that we do is something that's discussed in this week's portion and in these two portions, Tazriah and Metzorah. After the portion begins talking about a woman who gives birth and has to go through a purification process, and if she has a boy, he has to go through a purification process, meaning he has to have a bris, which creates a covenant that rests with him forever. The Torah goes on to talk about the laws of tzara'at. What is tzara'at? Tzara'at very often is translated as leprosy. It's really not a correct translation. Tzara'at is an affliction that came upon a person or their garments or their home. In biblical times, actually, this tzara'at was a mitzvah that applied in Eretz Yisrael, in the land of Israel. And when this mitzvah was given, when this commandment was given in this week's Parsha, the Jewish people were very spiritually sensitive. Remember, the Jewish people had been taken out of Egypt. They had seen many miracles. They had crossed the sea. They had been given the Torah, come to Mount Sinai, seen and experienced things that we can only begin to imagine of such revelations of holiness. And because of this, if a Jew did something contrary to the will of Hashem, their physical bodies would react to this because they were so spiritually sensitive. So what would happen? What is this mitzvah that we talk about in this week's Parsha? And this is called the mitzvah of tzara'as. So what is tzara'as? Tzara'as was a plague that was not a physical plague. It wasn't an illness. It couldn't be categorized with any physical ailment. However, it did manifest itself in a physical way. And what would happen is that the person's, either their home, the walls of their home, or their clothing, or their skin would get I guess you could call it a rash. And it had a white appearance, and it was called tzara'as. And how would a person know whether they were receiving tzara'as? They would know only one way, and that is that the Kohen, the priest, would say, yes, this is tzara'as. What were the things that brought about tzara'as? Why would a person receive tzara'as? And the tzara'as came as a result of lashon hara. So let's look at these two words, lashon hara. Lashon is the tongue, language, speech. Hara means evil speech. And if a person talks negatively about another person, that is called lashon hara. And there are different kinds of evil speech. There's motzi shemra, there is gossip, there is slander, there is maligning another person. All these things the result would be, at this time, in biblical times, the result would be that the person would be struck with this with this illness called tzara'as. And what would happen is they would go to the Kohen. The Kohen actually would come to them, and they would see it. They would look at the affliction, and if they saw that the affliction had the qualities of tzara'as, then they would proclaim that the person is impure and has been afflicted with tzara'as, and the person would have to leave their home and go into isolation. They would have to be quarantined. Why? Because the person had brought about a quarantine of another human being. Through their evil speech, they brought about isolation of another human being, and therefore the way to fix what they have done is to go into isolation themselves. But actually, the Torah goes on to tell us that of this isolation, there would be a purification process. But that purification process would be the culmination of this period of quarantining. And why was it needed? So let's look at the reason why a person would talk negatively about another person. Actually, even before we do that, I think it's important for us to ask ourselves, why is it so terrible to talk negatively about another person? Now, actually, really the question is, why is it so terrible to talk negatively, period? What's the difference? Didn't we all grow up singing sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me? The truth is, I believe the world has come to a place today where we don't sing that song anymore, where it's not politically correct. And actually, some of the political correctness is good. We don't want to throw it all out. Some of it is good, some of it is maybe not so good. But coming to this place of awareness of speech is a wonderful thing. You know, Hashem created this world through speech. Torah tells us, if you go into the book of Bereshit, into the book of Genesis, and you see how the world was created, it's fascinating. God said, let there be light, and there was light, and so on and so forth. 10 utterances. God created this entire world. So first of all, it's incredible that to think about that speech has the power to create. That's number one. Now, if speech has the power to create and God can do anything, why did God need to create the world with 10 utterances? So the sages tell us that God created the world with 10 utterances to teach us the importance of speech. That every utterance that we make has the power to create, but also to teach us the opposite. That with speech, we have the ability to do the opposite of creation. Oftentimes people will think about speech as nothing. It's not important what a person says. It's only speech, it's only words. But words are very, very powerful. There's a famous story of the Baal Shem Tov, that there were the founder of Hasidus, that in his synagogue, in his shul, there were two of his students who were having an argument. And one turned to the other in anger and said, I'm going to rip you apart like a fish. Obviously, they didn't realize the Baal Shem Tov was listening to this, but the Baal Shem Tov came into the room and he told his Hasidim, his disciples, to create a circle and to link arms. And he completed the circle and he took them into a trance, and he showed them how in the world of speech, this gentleman was being ripped apart like a fish. There is a world that becomes created from the words that we say. When we utter something, that utterance doesn't go into a vacuum. That utterance goes into a creative force. And therefore, we need to be so careful about how we speak. And now we can understand what the sages teach us about Lashon Hara. The sages tell us that when a person speaks negatively about somebody else, 3 people are hurt. The person who speaks the Lashon Hara, the person who listens to the Lashon Hara, and the person about whom the Lashon Hara is being spoken. Now we can understand. We understand that the person who is speaking the Lashon Hara, something negative they are bringing into the world. The person who is listening is also listening to something negative. But now when we know that speech becomes crystallized and has a reaction, we can understand why the person about whom we are speaking is adversely impacted. To this end, the Torah tells us that we need to be very, very careful about what we say, not just about other people, but especially about other people, because what we say can have a positive impact, or God forbid, what we say can have the opposite impact on not just another person, but on the world itself. So how do we go about bringing this mitzvah, fulfilling this mitzvah of not speaking Lashon Hara into our lives? So one of the ways to do it is to understand the mitzvah that we're given in this week's portion. The mitzvah, the parsha, is called Tazriah and Metzorah. Tazriah and Metzorah seem to be 2 opposite things. Tazriah is talking about a birth, a woman who gives birth. Metzorah is about a spiritual impurity, which is the opposite of that concept, the opposite of life. And in the juxtaposition of these 2 portions, we actually find the tool and the route to the healing. When a person was proclaimed impure, and take note, it's very interesting actually, again here we see the power of the speech. The only way the person became impure was when the Kohen said, "You are impure." And then again, how did the person become pure again? When the Kohen said, "You are no longer a Metzorah." So it was through speech. And that's why it was very important that the proclamation of the impurity came about through the Kohen, through the priest, because the Kohen was the embodiment of ahava, of love. If you listen to the bracha that's made before Birchas Kohanim, before the blessing of the priests, the bracha is that Hashem gives the commandment to the Kohen, levarech, to bless his people, ba'ahava, with love. And actually, a Kohen who has anger towards anybody in the specific congregation is not allowed to be one who blesses, because the Kohen embodies the concept of love. And therefore, only the Kohen, who was coming from a loving place, could tell a person that they now became impure, because actually the result of that impurity led to the isolation of the person, and that was the beginning of the process of the healing. How did the person become impure? The person became impure through their speech, through what they said. And we said that when a person got saras, spoke lashon hara, and got saras, was because they were very spiritually elevated. And therefore, when they spoke negatively about someone, the response, the reaction was very swift. What was the fact that that person spoke negatively a proof? It was a proof that even though generally the person's neshama, the person's soul, was very capable of expressing itself, meaning that the person had a great degree of purity and connectedness to Hashem, but there was a subtle blockage in there. And that was brought out, and that was expressed through the slip of the tongue. Because what a person says, what a person expresses through speech is an expression of what is hidden, of what is inside. And therefore, talking lashon hara is a revelation of something inside that needs to be fixed. So when a person got the tzoras and they had to go into quarantine, that was the time. That was the opportunity for the person to have some quiet time, not to be so busy with outside chatter and with outside activity, and to look within and to ask themselves, what's going on inside? Where is this expression of negativity coming from? There needs to be something within that needs to be fixed. So when a person speaks lashon hara, when a person, even though we don't get saras today, but all the lessons of these portions are very, very relevant to us. Torah is eternal. And even though we don't get saras today, we still are reading these portions and we're still learning these portions. Why? Because these commandments are very relevant to us today. So when a person speaks lashon hara, when a person speaks evil, how are they able to remedy this sin? So the way to remedy the sin is to dwell alone for a little bit. So the person can look inside and ask themselves what's going on. What is wrong inside? Why do I feel the need to talk negatively about someone else? Am I perhaps lacking in confidence? Do I feel down on myself? Do I feel less than worthy, that it makes me feel elevated and it makes me feel better if somebody else is less than me? Or maybe I am lacking in purpose. I don't feel that I have substance. So therefore, my speech is a reflection of the emptiness that I am feeling inside. There are many reasons. Maybe I'm bored. Maybe I have too much time on my hands. And rather than being bored, that leads me just to idle chatter, that ends up being negative idle chatter, Maybe that's why I'm talking negatively about somebody else. Or maybe I'm filling my time by being influenced by the media. I have so much spare time because I'm not filling it with my purpose that I'm watching a lot of television or I'm listening to a lot of talk shows, and the negativity is seeping into my own life. And for each one of us at a different time in our life, there could be a different reason why we end up talking negative. But I think perhaps one of the greatest antidotes to Lashon Hara, to speaking negatively, is the understanding and the realization of the gift of speech that Hashem has given to us, and the power of speech that we have been endowed with. Why did God give human beings the ability to speak? And that is because we are the singular creations in the world that have been given the privilege to be God's partner in creation of the world. And how did God create the world? God created the world with speech. And he said to us, I'm giving you speech. You are different. You know, there are 4 levels to creation, and each one has more life within it. So we have domain, we have the inanimate part of the world, like the earth and the rocks. We have someach, we have plant life. We have chai, we have the animals, and then we have people. And what do the sages call people? Medaber. The ability to speak is what sets us apart from the rest of creation. With that ability to speak comes the ability to think. We are not instinctive creatures. Animals live their lives instinctively. They have been programmed a certain way, and all their behavior is instinctive. Whatever it might be, it is so that they can survive and they can thrive. A person, a human being, and we are referred to as medaber, we do not live instinctively. We have seichel, we have intelligence, and we have the ability to make choices, to build, or God forbid, to do the opposite. And therefore, as human beings, we need to understand this. We need to recognize and appreciate this gift of speech that God has given to us. And when we internalize this lesson, we will begin to monitor the way we speak. You know, it's interesting, in last week's portion, we talked about what food we're supposed to eat, that a Jew is supposed to keep kosher. We talked about what we put into our mouth to make sure that our neshama, that our souls receive the nourishment that they need to receive. This week's parsha, we're learning that to keep our neshamas, to keep our souls, and to keep our purpose, being creative and being holy, we need to be careful what comes out of our mouth. And this means not only making sure that we don't talk negatively about another person, because that is destructive, not only to that person, but to our own selves and to the world at large, but also to realize that when we say a word, when we say something, what we say is powerful. And so we should use our words in a very discerning way, because we could build or, God forbid, destroy. The Torah teaches us that. The way the Torah expresses itself is always in a positive way. Anytime the Torah can avoid using negative words, it will do so. So when it talks about pure animals and animals that are not pure, instead of saying pure and impure, it will say pure and those that are not pure. A Jew needs to make sure that the words that come out of their mouth are always positive, are always uplifting, are always creating something that is positive, because our words are creative. The Lubavitcher Rebbe was very careful to do the same, and also to encourage us to be this way as well. And everything that we use our words for should be positive. So for example, in Hebrew, a hospital is called a Bet Cholim. Now, Bet Cholim means a place that houses sick people. And the Rebbe said we shouldn't call it a Bet Cholim. We should call it a Bet Refuah. So you might ask yourself the question, who cares what it's called, if as long as it's doing its job? No, we do care what it's called, because when we utter words, when we say words, they have the power to create life, or they have the power to do the opposite. And therefore we should always choose holy words. We should always choose positive words. We should always use uplifting words. There's a beautiful story of somebody who came to the Rebbe and told the Rebbe that they had just had a child, and that they had a daughter that was born, and they were crying, and they said, Rebbe, our daughter has Down syndrome. So the Rebbe looked at the mother, and he said, it's not a good idea to label the child as Down syndrome, and you should never mention it that way. And they really took the Rebbe's words to heart, and they would refer to her syndrome as up syndrome. And the Rebbe explained that when Hashem takes away a faculty from a human being, very often the world would describe this as somebody with a handicap. And the Rebbe said we shouldn't call a person a handicap, because what we have to understand and have to realize is when Hashem takes away from one area, he gives extra in another area, and therefore such a person is a special person. And these ideas are really catching on in the world. We hear this expression, rather than hearing handicapped, we hear special needs, rather than the expression retarded, which the Rebbe also was very, very averse to that expression, that we should use positive expressions, because speech has this great ability. Now we can understand, actually, it says that Mashiach is going to come, redemption is going to come through speech. And that makes perfect sense. What is speech? We said speech is revelation. What is Mashiach? Mashiach is revelation. Revealing what? Revealing all the service that we have done to bring about God's revelation in this world. That's our purpose. That's what we're doing here. So just as the world was created with speech, and that brought about the revelation of the world as we know it today, So too, Hashem said, I want you to complete that task that I started of creating a dwelling place in this world. So what's the purpose? The purpose is revelation. And how does revelation take place? Only through human beings who are called medaber, who have the ability to speak and to make choices, and that brings about the revelation of God in this world. And when that avoda, when that service is complete, that is when there will be the revelation. What revelation? The revelation of all the light and all the godliness that has been revealed and brought about in this world during the time of exile. Why are we in exile? Back to the Metzorah, back to the person who has tzara'as, who has leprosy. Well, it's not leprosy, but the tzara'as. What was the antidote to that affliction? The antidote was exile. Exile was the opportunity for the person to contemplate why they came to such a state where they were afflicted with tzara'as. We have been in exile for thousands of years. The Holy Temple was destroyed after thousands of years. We're still here, waiting. But within the exile is how we are supposed to arrive at the redemption. And we see that in this week's Torah portion. The Torah portion is called Tazriah and Metzorah. Seemingly two opposites. Tazriah meaning the concept of birth. Metzorah meaning the opposite of life. The one who becomes afflicted with tzara'as. But actually, if you look at these two words, Tazriah and Metzorah, tzara'as and Tazriah, they are really one and the same words. They're interchangeable. The letters of Tazriah and the letters of tzara'as are interchangeable. And this is to teach us that actually within the affliction is where the healing is found. You know, when the Jewish people came to Eretz Yisrael, when the Jewish people came to the land of Israel, Hashem said that when you come to the land of Canaan, which I'm giving you as a possession, and I place an affliction of tzara'at upon a house in the land of your possession. So the Midrash teaches us that from the words of this verse, we learn that God himself actually placed the tzara'as on the houses in Eretz Yisrael. And why did he do that? Because the law was that the house had to be taken down. The stones that were afflicted with tzara'as had to be removed. So when the Jews came to Eretz Yisrael, when they came to the land of Israel, God afflicted many of the stones of the homes with tzara'as. And the Jews had to follow this halacha, this law. And the Midrash tells us that what happened when they took apart the homes to remove the stones that had tzara'as, they found great treasures there. Because what happened was, when the Canaanim saw that the Jews were advancing and coming to Eretz Yisrael, and they knew that they were going to be successful, they didn't want them to have their treasures. So they took the treasures and they buried them and they hid them in the homes in their homes, so the Jewish people wouldn't be able to find them. So God said, you can't hide anything from me. And Hashem afflicted the homes with tzara'as, and the Jews in that way were able to find the hidden treasures. And this is a very important lesson and a very important message that Hashem is giving to us with this halacha, with this law. That it's in the affliction itself that we are going to find the healing. And sometimes it's difficult to come to that place where when a person is experiencing difficulty, they're able to find the healing within the difficulty. And sometimes it's a period of time, it takes time for a person to arrive at that place, to realize that the difficulty that Hashem is giving to us actually is the means, is the tool to be able to pick us up. And perhaps as we're learning this parsha and we're thinking about these halachas, these laws that don't necessarily apply today, but the spirit of the law certainly does apply today as we are finding ourselves in quarantine, as we are finding ourselves in an exile that has been going on for thousands of years. And now we find ourselves in a time where we're really acutely feeling that darkness and that hiddenness of light, perhaps within the quarantine, within the situation, we can find the cure, we can find the elevation. Now is the time where most of us have time on our hands and we're away from the noise and the chatter of the world, can give us an opportunity to think about specifically these mitzvahs connected to speech, and to think of ways that we can bring this mitzvah into our daily life, to use words in a positive way, to use words to build up, to use words to elevate, and to concentrate on the positive aspects of words. That way, it will give us the opportunity to find the cure within the malady, to bring about the revelation of Hashem through speech. And it could be in the positive way of only saying positive words, and it can also be in the way of holding ourselves back from speaking negatively when we think about and we contemplate what is it that's pushing us and driving us to perhaps speak negatively. And I would like to conclude with just, again, we've been talking a lot about this in the last 6 months, the tefillah, the prayer of Modeh Ani, which is really a prayer that is so invigorating and so empowering and so uplifting, where we wake up in the morning and we thank Hashem for giving us back our neshama, and we are acknowledging God's trust that He has in us. That when Hashem wakes me up in the morning, what Hashem is saying is, I have confidence in you. You are amazing. You have something special to contribute to the world. And if I can keep that momentum with me throughout the day and go back to that point of connecting to my essence, to my soul, to my purpose, to my Creator that shines His light upon me at every single moment of the day and has confidence in me, then I will feel better about myself and I will feel elevated, and that in turn will help me to be more positive and to express myself in a more positive way, and to realize that I can elevate other people through my speech. Or sometimes, if I'm not at that level yet, at least to hold back from doing something negative that brings about a negative response in this world. So I hope that everybody is hanging in there and realizing that at least if we have moments to realize and to remember that as dark as it may feel and as many challenges as there are, to remember that Hashem is with us, God is with us. He is tailor-making everybody's situation, and please God, we should have the strength to be able to find the healing in the malady, to be able to dig inside of ourselves and to find within this quiet time the way to strengthen ourselves. God bless everybody. Have a beautiful, wonderful week, and use our words to build and build. God bless.